Sun peeked over the horizon, painting the Montana sky in hues of pink and gold. Birdsong filled the air at Blue Horizon Ranch, but the serenity was deceptive. Jett Dalton felt a knot of unease in his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong.
He looked over at Jennifer, his wife. She slept soundly, her red hair spilling over the pillow. Her face, usually lit with a vibrant smile, was pale and drawn in sleep. The events of the past few weeks had taken their toll on both of them.
It had all started with the arrival of Anton Virelli. A slick businessman from the East, he had charmed the town with promises of prosperity. Jett, however, saw through Virelli's facade. He sensed a darkness lurking beneath the surface. His instincts were confirmed when Virelli set his sights on Blue Horizon, made a hefty offer to buy the ranch, an offer Jett promptly refused. Jett ran a hand through his own dark hair, his gaze fixed on the window. He knew Virelli wasn't a man to take no for an answer, and Jett was prepared to fight tooth and nail to protect his home, his wife, and everything he held dear. Little did he know, the fight was about to come knocking on his door. A shadow fell across the doorway. Jake Harrison, an old friend and Jett's foreman, stood there. His face was grim.
"Morning, Jett," he said, his voice low. "Got some news. Don't think you're gonna like it."
Jett's jaw tightened. "Spit it out, Jake."
Jake stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him.
"Been doing some digging on Virelli," he said, his voice barely a murmur. "Turns out he's got his fingers in a lot of dirty pies, mining mostly. Illegal operations up in the old Black Ridge mine."
Jett's blood ran cold. Black Ridge was a dangerous place. Prone to collapses, it had been closed for decades.
"What's he mining up there, Jake?"
"Not sure," Jake admitted, "but it's bad news, whatever it is. And here's the kicker. He's got men watching you, Jett. Watching Jennifer, too."
Jett felt a surge of protectiveness. He knew Virelli was ruthless, but to threaten Jennifer, that crossed a line.
"Thanks, Jake," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I owe you one."
Jake nodded and left the room. Jett stood there, his mind racing. Virelli was playing a dangerous game, and Jett was determined to beat him at it. But first, he needed to protect Jennifer. A frantic pounding on the door shattered the tense silence. Jett spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. He opened the door, his heart pounding. A young boy no older than 10 stood panting on the porch. His face was streaked with tears and dust. "Boy!" "Mr. Dalton," he gasped. "You gotta help me. It's Miss Jennifer." Jett's blood turned to ice. He grabbed the boy by the shoulders, his grip firm but not hurting.
"Slow down, son. What about Miss Jennifer? Boy, he took her," the boy stammered, his words tumbling over each other. "Virelli's men, they came to the schoolhouse, grabbed Miss Jennifer, took her to the Black Ridge mine."
Jett felt a surge of rage. Virelli had miscalculated. He'd underestimated the bond between Jett and Jennifer. He'd awakened a fury in Jett's soul that wouldn't be quelled until Jennifer was safe. Jett didn't waste a second. He scooped the boy up and carried him inside.
"Jake!" he roared, his voice echoing through the house.
Jake appeared in an instant, his eyes taking in the scene. Jett quickly explained the situation.
"I need you to get to town," he told Jake. "Fetch Sheriff Carter and meet me at the Black Ridge mine. And Jake,
"Yeah?"
tell the sheriff to bring everything he's got." Jett's voice was cold steel.
He strapped on his gun belt and grabbed his Winchester rifle. He kissed Jennifer's forehead gently.
"Don't worry, darling," he whispered. "I'm coming."
Jett and the boy mounted Jett's Appaloosa, Starfire. Jett spurred the horse into a gallop. They thundered out of the ranch yard, dust billowing in their wake. The Black Ridge mine was a good hour's ride, but Jett would make it in half the time if he had to ride Starfire into the ground. Each pounding hoofbeat hammered a single thought into Jett's mind. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land, making the approaching mountains seem even more ominous. The air grew colder as they climbed, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and something else. Something metallic and sharp. Danger. The entrance to the Black Ridge mine loomed before them, a gaping maw in the side of the mountain. Jett dismounted, securing Starfire to a nearby tree. He could hear the boy's frightened breaths beside him. Jett Johnson, as narrator. "Stay here," Jett ordered, his voice firm but kind. "You're safe now." The boy nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Jett drew his Colt, the familiar weight reassuring in his hand. He crept towards the mine entrance, his senses on high alert. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. Fear. Jett moved cautiously through the maze of tunnels, his boots echoing on the rough ground. The only light came from the setting sun filtering through the occasional opening above. He could hear the faint murmur of voices ahead. He pressed himself against the tunnel wall, his heart pounding in his chest. He peered around the corner. A group of Virelli's men stood guard outside a heavy wooden door. They were armed, their faces grim. Jett knew he couldn't take them all on in a straight fight. He needed a plan. He needed a distraction. Just then, the sound of approaching horses reached his ears. Hope surged through him. It must be Jake and the sheriff. The sound of horses grew louder, echoing through the mine shafts. Jett used the distraction to slip past the guards, his movements silent and swift. He reached the heavy wooden door, pressed his ear to the rough wood. He could hear Jennifer's voice, muffled but unmistakable. He tried the handle, locked. He drew back his foot and kicked the door in with a resounding crash. The room beyond was dimly lit by flickering lanterns. In the center, Jennifer sat tied to a chair, her face pale but defiant. Virelli stood before her, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Marco, as Virelli. "Ah, Mr. Dalton," Virelli purred, his voice smooth as silk. "I was wondering when you'd grace us with your presence." Jett Johnson, as narrator. "Let her go, Virelli," Jett growled, his voice low and dangerous. "This ends now." Virelli laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. Marco, as Virelli. "I'm afraid it's not that simple," he said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You see, Mr. Dalton, I have a proposition for you. A trade, if you will." Jett's grip tightened on his Colt. He glanced at Jennifer. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her chin was held high. She met his gaze, her eyes pleading with him not to give in. But Jett knew he had no choice. He couldn't risk Jennifer's life, not for anything. He lowered his gun slightly, his face a mask of defeat. Jett Johnson, as narrator. "All right, Virelli," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "You win. I'll sign." Just then, a small figure darted into the room. The young boy who had warned Jett stood trembling in the doorway. Luke, as young boy. "Don't do it, Mr. Dalton," he cried out. "He's lying. He's gonna blow up the mine. He's got dynamite rigged to go off." Virelli's face contorted in rage. He lunged for the boy, but Jett was faster. He fired a shot into the air, the deafening blast echoing through the mine. Jett Johnson, as narrator. "Run, son," he yelled, his voice booming. The boy hesitated for a moment, then turned and fled. Virelli's eyes were blazing with fury. He reached into his coat and pulled out a detonator.
"You've made a grave mistake, Dalton. Now you're both going to pay."
Jett's heart leaped into his throat. He had to act fast. He fired another shot, this time aiming for the detonator in Virelli's hand. The shot hit its mark, sending the detonator flying across the room. Chaos erupted. Virelli's men, alerted by the gunshots, stormed into the room. Jett fired back, his Colt spitting fire and lead. Jake and Sheriff Carter burst through the doorway, guns drawn. A fierce gun battle ensued, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and the deafening roar of gunfire. Jett, using Jennifer as a human shield, fought his way towards the heavy wooden door. He kicked it open and shoved Jennifer through, yelling for her to run. He covered her retreat, firing blindly at the shadows that lunged at him from the darkness. Jett felt a searing pain in his shoulder. He staggered back, clutching at the wound. He was out of ammunition. He was trapped. He braced himself for the inevitable. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the mine. Debris rained down from the ceiling. Jett shielded his head with his arm, his vision filled with dust and smoke. He coughed, struggling to breathe. When the dust settled, he saw Virelli lying on the ground, unmoving. Jake and Sheriff Carter appeared beside him, their faces grim.
"You all right, Jett?"
Jake asked, his voice filled with concern. Jett nodded, wincing as he moved his injured shoulder.
"She's safe. The boy led her out another way. They're both waiting outside."
Relief washed over Jett. He had been so focused on stopping Virelli, he had almost forgotten about the boy who had risked his own life to save them all. He owed that boy everything. The sun felt warm on Jett's face as he stepped out of the mine. He drew in a deep breath of fresh air, savoring the sweetness after the stifling darkness. Jennifer rushed into his arms, her tears a mixture of relief and joy. He held her close, burying his face in her hair.
"It's over, darling. It's finally over."
The boy who had raised the alarm stood awkwardly to the side, his clothes torn and dirtied. Jett released Jennifer and knelt down in front of the boy.
"You saved our lives, son. You're a true hero."
The boy blushed, ducking his head shyly. Jett put a hand on his shoulder.
"What's your name, son?"
"Billy." the boy mumbled.
Well, Billy, you're always welcome at Blue Horizon. You're family now.
As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land, Jett and Jennifer rode Starfire back towards Blue Horizon. Jennifer nestled against Jett's chest, the warmth of his body a comforting presence against the cool evening air. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with love and admiration.
You were incredible back there. So brave, so selfless.
Jett smiled, a tender look in his eyes.
I did what I had to do, to protect you, to protect our home.
They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of Starfire's hooves beating a soothing melody. The events of the day had shaken them both to their core, but they had faced their fears together. Their love had been tested, and it had emerged stronger than ever. As they approached the ranch, they saw lights shining in the windows, heard the sound of laughter carried on the evening breeze. Jake and the ranch hands were preparing a celebratory feast, eager to welcome their hero and his wife home. Jett looked at Jennifer, his eyes filled with love and gratitude. They had faced their share of challenges, and they knew there would be more to come. But they would face them together, united by a bond that could never be broken. For at Blue Horizon, love always found a way.